For over 3,000 years, this story of beautiful queens and tragic betrayals has captured our imaginations like absolutely nothing else. But underneath all the Hollywood movies and the magical myths, historians and archaeologists have literally been fighting over the truth for centuries.
So, to actually answer that, we're going to need to unpack the whole story. First, we'll look at the grand, romantic, and honestly pretty blood-soaked myth, exactly how the ancient Greeks saw it. Then, we get to put on our detective hats to dig up the stunning, real-world evidence. We're talking forgotten empires, destroyed cities, and the true economic bloodbath that brought down a Bronze Age superpower.
All right, part 1, the epic myth, gods, kings, and the golden apple.
So, the spark for this whole conflict? It didn't actually happen on a muddy battlefield. It started at a seriously glamorous wedding party on Mount Olympus roughly 3,200 years ago. Every god was invited except one, Eris, the goddess of chaos. Furious, she crashed the party and tossed a pure golden apple onto the floor, setting off a massive divine argument. The top 3 goddesses demanded Zeus pick a winner, but he smartly passed that dangerous job to a mortal shepherd boy named Paris, who, plot twist, was secretly a prince of Troy. The goddesses offered these massive bribes. Hera offered political power, Athena offered invincibility in war, but Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. Paris made the fateful choice of love over power or wisdom, which absolutely infuriated Hera and Athena and basically doomed his entire homeland.
But there was a huge catch. The most beautiful woman on earth? That was Helen of Sparta, and she was already married to King Menelaus. Because literally everyone wanted to marry her, her stepfather had previously forced all the Greek kings to swear this thing called the Oath of Tyndareus, meaning they had to fiercely protect her marriage. So when Paris seduced, or abducted, Helen and took her back to Troy, he triggered this ancient oath. Menelaus' incredibly powerful brother, King Agamemnon, commanded the kings of Greece to honor their word, and they assembled an unprecedented fleet of over 1,000 ships just to get her back.
Now, when that massive Greek fleet finally hit the beaches near Troy, they ran into a city with these towering stone walls, defended by the brilliant Prince Hector. The Greeks set up camp on the beach, and then, well, everything just stalled. It's actually a super common misconception that Homer's famous epic, the Iliad, covers the entire war. Nope, it literally only covers a few short, bloody weeks in the 10th year of a totally exhausting, brutal stalemate.
During those final weeks, things get intense. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, refuses to fight over a bruised ego, which leads to his best friend getting killed by Hector. Achilles goes into an absolute blind rage, slaughters Hector, and brutally drags his body behind a chariot for days. But the real climax of the Iliad isn't the fighting. It's this incredibly powerful moment of human empathy. King Priam of Troy, this elderly grieving father, sneaks into the enemy camp at night and begs Achilles for his son's body. And in that shared moment of grief, Achilles finally relents.
But hey, the war wasn't over yet. The myth wraps up with Odysseus and, of course, that giant wooden horse. The Greeks faked a retreat, leaving this massive horse on the beach as a quote-unquote peace offering. Even though a Trojan priest named Laocoon literally yelled, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," the Trojans still dragged the fake offering right inside their own walls. You know how this ends. That night, hidden Greek soldiers slipped out, opened the gates for their returning army, and Troy was burned to ashes.
Moving on to Section 2. Digging for Troy, the search for the real city. For centuries, modern scholars just laughed this epic tale off as a total fairy tale. Until the 19th century, when a wealthy German millionaire named Heinrich Schliemann decided he was going to prove the entire academic world wrong. The guy takes a copy of Homer's Iliad to Turkey, basically treating it like a pirate's treasure map, and starts digging into a massive artificial hill called Hisarlik. But here's the thing, Schliemann was not a trained archaeologist. In his wild, impatient rush to find Homer's glorious city at the very bottom, he literally used dynamite. He blasted a 40-foot deep trench right through the center, and in doing so, accidentally blew up thousands of years of priceless human history.
What's actually fascinating about this is that the Hisarlik mound is what's called a tell. Think of it like a giant historical layer cake. It contains at least 9 completely distinct layers of civilization, just stacked right on top of each other over thousands of years. Cities were built, destroyed, and rebuilt in the exact same spot.
So Schliemann finds some gold in the Troy's second layer and proudly declares he found Homer's city. Well, actually, scratch that. Modern science later proved he made a colossal mistake. Troy II was destroyed a full 1,000 years before the Trojan War even could have happened. He dug way too deep. It wasn't until decades later that real archaeologists discovered Troy's 7th a grand, wealthy, and heavily fortified late Bronze Age city that perfectly matches the timeline.
And the physical evidence in Troy 7a is just undeniable. We're talking stones completely blackened by intense fire, actual bronze arrowheads jammed right into the stone walls, giant food storage jars buried deep in the floors, which proves the population was hoarding rations to survive a prolonged siege, and, chillingly, unburied skeletons lying in the streets with severe head trauma. This wasn't a myth. A grand walled city was absolutely besieged, sacked, and burned to the ground right around 1200 BCE.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Hittite clues, smoking guns and clay tablets.
Finding burned ruins on a hill is amazing, but how do we definitively connect this to the ancient Greeks? Well, we have to look outside of Greece, at the meticulous records of another Bronze Age superpower located in central Turkey, the Hittite Empire. When experts translated their clay tablets, the linguistic matches were mind-blowing. The Hittites wrote about a powerful coastal city called Wilusa, which is the ancient Greek pronunciation for Wilios, or Troy. They recorded seafaring invaders called the Ahiawa, perfectly matching the Achaeans, Homer's name for the Greeks. And the absolute smoking gun? A Hittite treaty from around 1280 BCE made with a Trojan king named Alexandru, which is Alexander, the alternate name for Prince Paris. I mean, that is documentary proof of Bronze Age Greeks attacking a Trojan king named Alexander.
All right, Part 4. The real Bronze Age War. Why did they really fight?
So, if the war undoubtedly happened, we kind of have to strip away that whole romantic stolen queen narrative. Thousands of men do not risk their lives and burn a city to the ground just for a pretty face. The real cause? It's all about geography and economics. Troy was sitting right at the mouth of the Dardanelles. This is a super narrow, incredibly difficult water strait connecting the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea. Thanks to crazy northward currents and winds, passing trade ships would literally get physically trapped there for weeks, just waiting for favorable winds.
And because Troy controlled the harbor, right where those ships were stuck, they held a total monopoly over all naval trade. They forced everyone to pay outrageous tolls and taxes. Meanwhile, the expanding Mycenaean Greeks desperately needed foreign grain, timber, and metal from the Black Sea, and Troy was taxing their profits and blocking access. The Greeks did not launch 1,000 ships for a stolen bride. They launched 1,000 ships to violently crush an economic rival and take over the most profitable trade choke point in the ancient world.
Finally, Section 5, How History Became Legend, the synthesis of myth and fact.
So how on earth did a gritty economic turf war turn into a magical story of gods, golden apples, and invincible heroes over the centuries? Well, the fall of Troy wasn't an isolated event. It was actually part of a catastrophic regional meltdown known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. Right around 1200 BCE, the entire civilized Mediterranean world just fell apart into chaos and fire. Empires vanished, grand stone palaces fell, writing systems were entirely forgotten, and the survivors were plunged into a terrifying dark age that lasted for 400 years.
And then during that 400-year dark age, there were no books. So how did the story survive? Through traveling oral storytellers. Bards kept the memory of the Trojan War alive by singing about it around campfires. Generation after generation, these poets would slowly layer in magical gods, sweeping romances, and larger-than-life heroes, mostly just to make the story more entertaining for their audience. It wasn't until around 750 BCE, when the Greeks finally relearned how to write, that a poet named Homer took this massive, centuries-old oral tradition and committed the masterpiece to paper.
Please like and subscribe.